We're going to turn now to the Republic of Korea, South Korea, where there's been quite a bit happening since the attempt to bring in martial law by President Yoon recently. We are very, very happy to be joined here on the show once again by Ju-Hyun Park, who's a member of Nodutdol and the engagement editor at The Real News. Ju-Hyun, as always, thanks so much for being with us here on the show.
Eugene, Rania, wish I could be here under better circumstances, but it's good to be here with you.
Well, we're happy to have you here with us to understand it. There was the attempt at bringing in martial law, now the attempts to impeach President Yoon, who is resisting his impeachment. Maybe just to start, I mean, where do things stand now? I mean, he's still the president, but is it seem likely he could be impeached, or where are we in the political element of it?
Yes, so to just start things off, it's been a real roller coaster, Eugene. Things are changing day by day, hour by hour. A week ago, the ruling party was boycotting the impeachment vote. Now it's looking like that could shift very quickly. The vote is coming up this Saturday. The ruling party leader has turned on President Yoon and announced his support for the impeachment. And by the latest tally that I've seen, 7 out of the 8 votes that are needed from the ruling party to secure that vote have been expressed publicly. Now, I think something that needs to be understood about the process is that impeachment does not mean the end of this struggle, because the impeachment is only an indictment. After that, the Supreme Court needs to make a verdict, but crucially, that court does not have quorum at this time. There are 9 spots on the bench, only 6 of them are filled, and 7 are required under the Constitution in order to make a ruling of this kind. So, what that means is that this could drag on for several more months, and there may be many opportunities for President Yoon and for the ruling party to affect the outcome. We do have to remember that while things are looking bad for him right now, he does still have loyalists in the government, and there are a lot of details coming about the extent of his coup plans, which really show what chilling, disgusting atrocities this man was planning for the Republic of Korea, that was narrowly avoided just last week, but that doesn't mean that we won't see a possible return to this sort of these sort of threats that have been made on against the people of Korea.
Julian, I'd love for you to elaborate on some of the details that are coming out of what this coup plan was, which included this attempt to trigger a limited war with North Korea. And also, I do recall when this coup or when this martial law was first being reported, the Yoon was basically accusing his rivals of all being like North Korean sympathizers. Um, I'm also curious if you could so tell us about some of those details about what this plan was and why it's so dangerous. And you can maybe walk us through a bit about some of the militaristic, hawkish policies that had already been implemented by this administration ahead of what seems like a very well planned out strategy to trigger a war with North Korea.
Absolutely. Before I get into it, I do need to start with the caveat that this is an evolving situation. There are ongoing hearings happening in the parliament, ongoing investigations. There are claims that are currently being made, evidence that is being presented. So there is an array of information that's out there. There are things that we know for certain at this point, and there are things where we still need to wait for a little bit more evidence to definitively say what is fact or not. Let's start with what we know. What are the facts? The facts are that the planning for this coup began in July of 2023, so it's been planned for more than a year. We also know that President Yoon personally gave orders to high ranking members of the military and police to arrest key lawmakers on the night of the coup. We also know that because we have seen the planning documents for the coup itself, that they cited precedents for martial law that included the Gwangju and Jeju massacres, which are 2 of the worst atrocities in Korea's modern history. So already this is painting a pretty grim picture, and it's demonstrating that although what actually transpired last week did not seem to be a very well planned coup, there was actually a great deal of planning that went into this, and there were very dark aspirations that were also informing the way that this coup was being executed. Now, let's get into what certain lawmakers are saying, and these are claims that we still need to wait for a little bit more evidence to be absolutely certain of. But a number of opposition lawmakers are currently coming forward with claims from anonymous military sources that President Yoon may have been planning to essentially restart the Korean War. The claim is that specifically that he was looking for a limited conflict with North Korea that could provide a pretext for the martial law order. Now, I've come on this program in the past to talk about the garbage balloons that the DPRK has been sending to South Korea this year. This is a crucial detail. The Yoon administration has already used this as a pretext to make a number of escalations along the inter-Korean border this summer. But back in October, there was a new line that was crossed because Pyongyang reported for the first time that they had spotted several drones violating their airspace that month, and that a couple of these had actually crashed. And they were able to produce photographs showing that these drones bore a very strong resemblance to models used by South Korea's military. Now, at the time, the defense ministry in South Korea said that it could not confirm, and that's not answering in the affirmative or the negative. They were not denying it. They simply said they could not confirm whether or not these drones came from military sources. Now, what we are learning this week, thanks to the testimony of lawmaker Park Bom-ge, who is of the Democratic Party, he is saying that a military source has told him that these drones were in fact sent by the South Korean military. And what's more, there was also a container fire this week at a South Korean military base where several of these drones were stored. The commander of the South Korean drone force was then brought to parliament for questioning this week, and lawmakers asked him point blank, who ordered you to send drones to Pyongyang? Where did you launch the drones from? And all he could say, again, was, I can't confirm that. So we have military officials that are receiving very intense, very pointed questioning. And instead of responding in the affirmative or the negative, they're not even seeking to deny it. They're simply saying that they are unable to confirm information. So this is raising a lot of suspicions within South Korea as to the veracity of the claims that have been put forward by lawmakers about plans for a limited war. There is also a separate claim that has been put forward by another lawmaker who is saying that a military source has also told him that the former defense minister, Kim Yong-hyun, who is currently in jail awaiting an indictment, it is reported that Minister Kim attempted to order a direct strike on North Korea last month in response to one of these volleys of garbage balloons. Now, when questioned, the Joint Chiefs of Staff did say, they actually did this time deny that that order was given. However, when they were pressed around the matter of whether these conversations were happening around having a direct strike, all they could say was sometimes the military discusses certain scenarios or something to that effect. So we have a lot of very interesting claims that have been put forward so far. There is a picture that is coming together that holds ground, at least from the standpoint of thinking about motive. What we are waiting to understand is whether or not there will be an opportunity to have decisive evidence, decisive testimony that helps us clear up what has happened. But in any case, I think that something that we need to take away from this experience is just how dangerous the situation in Korea could have been and could still become. And we also need to be asking some really difficult questions about the role of Washington in all of this. Now, we don't know a lot about what Washington's involvement could have been, but I think even without knowing much of the specifics, what we can definitively say is that this was a president who, from the beginning, demonstrated extreme anti-democratic and militaristic tendencies. He was embraced by Washington. He was exalted as not only a key ally, but a democratic leader in the region and the world. They were calling South Korea a global pivotal state. Members of the Biden administration were recommending that President Yoon receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And so I think this tells us a lot about the kinds of alliances the United States is willing to make, and also the effect that it's having on South Korean politics, because it is really the most reactionary, the most dangerous elements of South Korean society that are the closest to the US, because they are the only ones who are willing to uphold an agenda that is basically willing to transform Korea into a war zone yet again in order to serve US interests. So we need to be scrutinizing this very, very closely. I think it's important that people keep their eye on the ball, and we continue to watch the situation and resist any attempts to present a narrative that everything is tidy and done and democracy has won the day, because that is clearly not the case and not what really is going on here.
Well, one of the other aspects of this is it seems to have struck a deep chord amongst many of the people in the ROK in South Korea. We've seen huge demonstrations. We've seen, I mean, the initial opposition to the martial law with a number of heroic acts by people confronting the military and different pieces like that. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that as well, Ju-Hyun, about how this has seemingly at least really brought the popular forces, into the forefront of the discussion about what the future of the country should be.
Absolutely. I think over the last week, we've seen tremendous bravery from the masses of people in South Korea. When the initial announcement of martial law was made, I think the terror that must have been felt by millions of people would have been so deep and palpable, especially given that martial law is something that is in recent memory for South Koreans in particular. The last time the country was under martial law was between 1980 to 1987. My mom was a student in that time. She walked through seas of tear gas practically every day just to get to her classes. She wasn't even an activist. These are things that are really embedded in people's memories. And I think that it's really a testament to the bravery of our people that so many folks just mobilized in the middle of the night. This announcement was made close to midnight. And in spite of that, tens of thousands of people were gathering at the National Assembly to ensure that martial law could not return to the country. People were walking on foot across bridges in Seoul just to get to the protest location. I think that it really speaks to people's willingness to fight back. When the initial impeachment vote happened, there were over 1 million people in the streets of Seoul. And since then, these demonstrations have continued. And I think, there's a lot of emphasis in the media right now on the strength of South Korea's institutions or of its liberal democratic party. But I think the real protagonists here are the people of South Korea. I think they're the ones that are really driving the situation, really affecting the landscape and the kinds of decisions that key power players can make, including President Yoon. And I think it's thanks to their pressure that we are seeing so many lawmakers begin to fall in line from the ruling party. And I think it also explains a lot of the bravery being demonstrated by a number of the opposition lawmakers as well, asking these difficult questions, being willing to do things like spend the night in the parliament to ensure that it can't be taken again. So I think this is a moment where, there is a lot of pride to be felt, and at the same time, just an incredible sense of, I don't really want to call it despair, but there is also a pain. Why is it that another generation has to struggle in this way just to ensure some of the most basic rights that should be taken for granted by all people in the world, but particularly in a country like South Korea where so many generations of people have had to engage in the same struggle? The last time that millions of people had to be out in the streets to depose a South Korean president was less than 10 years ago, right? And now many of the same people who were out in that struggle back in 2016, 2017 are back at it again. And so I think while there's much to celebrate, it also speaks to the deep structural nature of the crisis that is facing South Korea, that is reflected in the difficulties of the impeachment process. It's reflected in the influence that the United States has had on the Yoon administration. And I think it really speaks to how much further there is still left to go in terms of building a real political project that serves the majority of people and also achieves a sovereign country, which is really what this is about at the end of the day. Is there going to be a sovereignty for the United States, for the big conglomerates in South Korea, only for the ruling class? Or is there going to be a sovereignty that's based on the will of the actual masses of people and the broad majority of society?
hmm Well, as always, Ju-Hyun, it's great to have you here to sort through all this. It's, as you say, an ongoing dynamic situation, so we'll continue to cover it as best we can. But thank you so much, as always, for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Of course, thank you again, and I hope you both have a blessed day.